Welcome to Distance by Design. This is a show where we talk about creativity, innovation, and collaboration in the midst of a global pandemic, where we can't be together in person, but we still want to do the things that make our world interesting and help us lean into the future. My guests today are Larry Lander and Laura Magrisso. Both of you are coming from not in Cincinnati, so we're embracing the distance thing to the fullest extent here. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, where you're at, and if you have an interesting story about, I don't know, of the birth of a recent animal or anything like that, would love to hear those too. So, Larry, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thanks. Glad to be here. It's exciting. My name is Larry Lander. I'm a partner with Planning Design Research Corporation. PDR is a architecture and design firm in Houston, Texas, based in Houston. We're about 100 people. I came to Houston from Cincinnati when I graduated, and it's been now 40 years, which is unbelievable to me. Had never really been to Houston, saw it sight unseen, couldn't imagine living here, and now decades have gone by. Most of my family are native Texans, so amazing how that happens. But graduated in 1979 with an architecture degree. I'm a partner in my firm, PDR. We specialize in workplace design and helping businesses both transform their organization, improve their own business performance through the context of a workplace, and really think about the human experience in our work. That's the important aspect as far as we're concerned. So how all of the last 11, 12, 13, 14 weeks, however many it is, how they've affected the workplace is a important thing, not only to us personally, you're coming from home, of course, but also in terms of what our clients are looking at. So it's a pretty important aspect of, and we all spend a lot of time at work, and so why can't it be the best thing that it is?
Yeah. That's great. I love that you've embraced your Texasness, even though you're not from. It's good that they've embraced you too. I know that
It's a friendly place. It's a very friendly place.
I had a mentor in college who married. He was not from Texas, but he married a woman from Texas who then they lived in Cincinnati, and she actually had a family member bring some dirt from Texas in a cup, put under the pillow when they were giving birth to their first child, so she could say, "My son was born on Texas soil." That was the level of seriousness.
Wow, that's commitment.
I've heard people do that.
Yeah. So, Lauren, tell us about you and where you're coming from here.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Well, lovely to be here, virtually gathering. I'm a principal at Jump Associates, and we are a strategy and innovation firm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. So our offices are in San Mateo. We are now located all over, and I'm calling in from the East Bay, where I live on an urban farm, and kind of what Aaron alluded to. Last week, we had the very exciting addition of 2 baby goats. So it's always fun, even these trying times, to celebrate the beauty around us, including new life. So really excited to be here today. Really resonate with what you said, Larry, about the kind of the human aspect of design. We at Jump are very we start with a deep empathy for people, and we get to know them kind of beyond just being a customer or user, but really for their full selves. We do a lot of creative work around what the future could look like and imagining possible visions for our clients. And then also the third step is really figuring out the business strategy of how do you actually make that viable, and what are the prototypes and experiments you need to run to bring that forward. So that's a little bit about Jump. And I'm really excited to talk about how, collaboration and creativity, innovation are changing, adapting in this moment. And we're seeing a lot of phenomenal changes for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you all are talking about some of these same things. So, as a faculty member at UC, I teach classes on design thinking and innovation, and how do we collaborate across disciplines, and all these things that you're both talking about are important to have happen. But normally, the way that this would play out is going to be in person, and you're going to be doing this by sort of getting your hands dirty together on something. A lot of times, prototyping means physically touching it, right, and working with it. So how are you all finding that this kind of transition takes place? I mean, I guess one of the first things to look at is walk us through what did creativity and collaboration look like pre-pandemic, and then how is that now evolving? You've had about 3 months to kind of struggle through it, and I think at the beginning of this process, a lot of people just tried to figure out how do I maybe pause that section of my business until we get back together again in a couple months,
Yeah.
or maybe just how do I try and replicate it online, which doesn't work either. By now, it's starting to sink in. Maybe you could walk us through a little bit of like, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way and are finding and evolving to?
Definitely. And like the world needs creativity now more than ever. Just because we're remote doesn't mean we can all of a sudden stop it. So I guess I can paint a bit of a picture of what creativity looked like at Jump before the pandemic. So we, as a hybrid firm, we have actual project rooms where teams of anywhere between 4 to 6 people are fully staffed on one space. So they're living and breathing the future of banking or kind of how to figure out healthcare of the future, right? So they're like in that space all the time. And so the fact that they would be able to have that space where they can literally have displayed thinking around the room, tons of post-its, books that they're reading, and having like a lot of things to mark up and figure out is really important. Plus the psychological safety that we know is so important for creativity to thrive. This like understanding the whole person and that you're getting to know them not just as your coworker, but all the things that they can kind of pull from for their work. So as we've moved to the online forum, of course, we can't like stop working, and now more than ever, our clients need us. The key is the tools that we use online have really been optimized for task division and execution, which is like the fundamental like opposite of what you need when you're doing explore work or creative work. So we have done a lot of very intentional processes to make sure we don't lose the magic of like those deep conversations, or when you're doing free form writing, and just seeing where this idea will go, or kind of capturing the magic of an idea in the shower. And so we've seen the teams do a couple things. One, they've set up, we use Microsoft Teams. So they'll set up like a virtual project room for the whole day. And so they're not setting up meetings. So you can pop in and out of that space and find other team members and collaborate. The other thing is folks have really appreciated Miro because it's, post-sitting kind of app where you can do a lot more kind of decentralized thinking and more mind mappy versus just like, hey, go fill out this Word document and execute. And then the other thing is we make sure that when we start check-ins, we're like catching up, like, hey, what's going on, right? All of us are emotionally fried and the bandwidth is lower. So we need to even more time to make sure we're connecting on that human level, as well as really making sure that we're giving time away from the screen for people to be kind of ideologuing in their journals and exploring concepts and coming back. So those are just some of the things we're doing. I'm curious, Larry, kind of how your setup is and how is that similar or different for you and your teams?
I love what you're saying. We're also a Teams platform. So it's kind of interesting to consider this topic, because what we talk about is the fact that we've had this pandemic and everybody's worked from home. All of a sudden, a thing that seemed kind of odd at almost every business now is becoming the normal. And we think employees will be empowered to work from home going forward. They're going to kind of demand it. And I like what you're saying, the differentiating, though, between kind of rote task kind of things. Some things work really well at home, particularly if you have adequate childcare or school in session. I could imagine it might even be better. But the things that require us to still get together will be main reasons that people still have an office. But we have clients asking, why do we have an office? And what are we really trying to do? And to us, it's about there's a culture that a company has, and how do you convey that? How do I feel part of PDR sitting at home week after week? And there is this creativity, collaboration, more than just getting on a Zoom call. We think big conference rooms with a big table and a bunch of chairs, that can go away, because that can easily be accommodated. One person talking, the rest of us listening, that can easily happen in a Zoom call. But 3 or 4 of us getting together, I love what you said about the, a dedicated workspace. That is super difficult to do virtually. One of the things we think about are what are technologies that are going to help us. Teams already has made, just in a few weeks, you can put more people on, you can get your own background, all that kind of stuff. They've kind of stolen some pages from the Zoom playbook. So I think they will continue to help us. But we say, the meetings there will always be virtual people in a meeting. And technology will help that be a lot more seamless. And the protocol will be, you always make sure that the virtual people are part and parcel of the meeting. It won't be good enough to just say, well, the two of us who are together in the room, we can talk about it, but we'll talk over each other, just like you do when you're together, and at the expense of ignoring the third person. So that won't be allowable. We won't like that. And there'll be, my robot will show up or my hologram will show up, even though I'm simply not in the room. Those things will happen. And I don't think those things are crazy, like, oh yeah, 20 years that'll happen. I think, we're months away from it, not decades away from it. We'll put on the goggles so we're all together in the same room. And the physical tools, like you say, how to recreate the helter skelter and really awesome capability of a whiteboard with a bunch of Post-its on it. That will happen. We're going to continue to get increasingly sophisticated tools to do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You both are talking about kind of these ideas of tools, and we've now worked with them long enough to recognize that that's really all they are. Like I think there was sort of this mystique around the idea of a platform that enabled more than one person to talk at the same time in a meeting. Right? I'm thinking about like Miro, or I'm using Mural for teaching a lot of my classes, which is very similar. And at first, it's almost like this parlor trick of like, oh, look, digital sticky notes, and they're moving around, and that alone is exciting for certain people. But we're far enough into it now to kind of be like, yeah, well, that the mystique of that tool has worn off. It's a matter of whether it enables us, right? And I love what you said, Lauren, about the fact that most of these tools were originally designed to actually try and just like streamline task lists and optimize. And instead, we need things now that actually, it's like we had to unthink that, right? Like, how do I actually slow that process down or make it a little bit harder to just check the box, because I actually want to make you go on a journey as opposed to just executing, right?
Yeah.
I use video as a poster child for what you just said, in the sense that we've always had people who work remotely from our Houston office. And my favorite is one of my colleagues who works in Nashville. And so whenever we meet with her, it has to be virtually. And she would shame us into turning on the video. And we never did it, because, the video, and I don't look good. And now, we get to see your bedroom or whatever it is. And now I have this feeling like, if you're not on the video and you've got it turned off, that's like a red flag. Like, what is it that you're not going to share with us? What have we not seen that will shock us?
Yeah.
And I think the same thing. There's a learning curve. We're pretty smart though, and we catch on pretty quickly. And I think these things we will see them as tools, and we'll look back in June of 2020. Go, God, can you believe that we use Teams? That is crazy, or Zoom, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, Larry, like, right, you're thinking about the future of office spaces, and I'm based in the Bay Area, and we're seeing a lot of tech companies announce like, hey, remote work forever. And I think these companies have an incentive of like encouraging people to continue to work remotely and setting that standard for their own business. But one of the things we think about as a leadership team at Jump is how we want to be really, really intentional about making sure we don't erode the creative culture and kind of falling into this, right? Like, there's this natural force right now that we're all going to be remote and we're making do, and we've kind of gotten to a rhythm. But if you think about that longer term arc, so much of us are naturally present focused. And so the idea that we would have been in 7 billion people on voluntary house arrest come last November, like none of us would have thought that was possible. But at the same time, many of us don't really imagine that we could get back to an environment where we'd be moving around at the same kind of pace that we were before. And so we don't know, right? It's uncertain, but we don't necessarily want to overreact and say, yeah, we're going to go digital forever and we're going to make it work, and say, actually, like, ultimately our goal is, how do we cultivate the most creative, supportive culture that we can? Because that's really what we need to help our clients with and deliver for the longer term.
One of the things that we talk about, because your point's an outstanding one, and in our own office, we've done this, what we call activity-based working or agile workplace, meaning that our 100 people at PDR in Houston don't have an assigned desk. And so everything is available. And you think I loved your word, thinking about it explicitly, intentionally. You think in the morning, well, what do I need to physically do today? And where would be the best place to do that? And so I think home or a third place, something better than Starbucks, but let's say Starbucks for a minute, or your kid's school. What if you could work there while you're doing something? I think we'll broaden the spectrum a little bit. And these things will be enough. And it won't be like, I love what you said. We're not going to just go to 100% some other thing. It's going to be a and proposition as opposed to an either or. And we talk about that a lot. And to me, almost every single organization can do that. So when the workplace, your downtown office space, if that's what it is, that's what it is for us. That is going to be so compelling because I want it to be cool. I want it to have things that I don't have at home. I don't need to be there all the time. And I don't want to take a spot for somebody who really needs to be there because they don't have a home place to do what they need to do. So, it needs to be a cool thing, really cool, like cooler than they are right now. But there's some things that I can do at home, and I will do them at home, and I'll feel empowered to do it because and we see this right now, workplaces that are coming back and they put signs up and everything's skull and crossbones and walk this way and don't walk that way and don't breathe on your neighbor and you're going to kill your employees and blah, blah, blah. That is a recipe for disaster, in our opinion. I mean, you got to put your people first. And now that we've been empowered to work in a different way, we're gonna vote with our feet. And I know that job losses and whatnot, that's a temporary situation. That'll get better over time. And once we're past all of that, people will say, I don't want to work. The first thing they did was order us all back to work. You come Monday, Wednesday, Friday, wear a mask at all times, walk in clockwise direction, wash your hands. I mean, some of these things we're of course going to do, but put your people first. Step number one.
So I've got a question for you, Larry, right? Because we ask people, oh, well, what do you like about working from home? What do you like from the office? And I've been thinking about there's things that I maybe consciously like or would want to request, but maybe aren't actually good for me longer term, right? Like is really like staring at this screen, 18 inches away from my face longer term, like really actually good for me. I'm not actually focusing on anything farther out, right? So like, how as a designer are you thinking about the bigger picture and not just maybe like what leadership is going to be asked from their employees of like, oh, we want to come in this much or that much? Like how are you thinking about advising in that way?
So one of the things we start with, because if you have an inbox, your inbox is filled with stuff, all these ideas, all these things we can do, and you're overwhelmed with it as an architect or a designer. And so one of the things that we do is actually delve into the whole question with real data. So we survey employees, we work with some kind of national data. The Leisman Index is one specifically that we've used, and they have 10,000 different companies that they deal with globally. And so if you can get real data and also do it over time, because your attitude in March was probably different than April, and it's definitely different than now. Some things are not so bad, or they're worse than they ever were. And so you have to sort of understand that and understand that dynamic. But we find use real data, make decisions based on data. Don't let anecdotal stories, because everybody's got them, about how, my cousin works in so-and-so and he heard that blah, blah, blah. That's not really going to cut it. Particularly when you're working with large organizations. We have seen, though, a lot of consistency. I think from our perspective, one of the things we think we'll get into over time will be work from home workplaces. I mean, how can we say we know the best there is? What is the good workplace? Well, there's so many places where the workplace will be. You'll have your downtown office. You'll have neighborhood hubs, so you don't need to drive all the way downtown from the suburbs. You'll have these third places, the kids' school or in a park or at Starbucks or restaurants or outdoor places. And then you'll have your home. So you have all these things. And that goes back to that and they all need to work, not just one or the other.
I think you both kind of have touched on something too, that it's interesting that we've done this long enough now that some of the novelty has worn off, and also some of the knee-jerk reactions have worn off in a good way, I think. I remember when everyone first started to be sort of nationally locked down, I had multiple conversations with people that were in senior enough leadership positions in their companies that they probably were advising decisions like this, who were all just saying like, well, now we're looking around and saying like, why did we ever pay for office space? We don't need to do this. We can save so much money. And it was troubling to me because of so many things that you both have even talked about already, right? The idea of like reducing everyone's job down to like what they can individually do staring at a 13-inch screen, removing that human interaction that's in the inspiration that comes from those sort of chance encounters, and the idea of what that expects of a person's home to be able to support too, right? It assumes that you have a dedicated space that you want to work at, and some of us chose to be in, maybe like, we live in a smaller house that's closer to the city because our sort of optimization of our life was around like, well, no, we don't want to spend money on a big house that's far away because we don't want to spend a lot of time in the car. I plan on going into work. Now I have a 5-minute commute and I'll sacrifice a smaller house as a result. But if you tell me now that like, well, no company's going to provide you with an office, well, shoot, I guess I shouldn't have bought a 2-bedroom house then, right? Like it just feels a little bit like some of these knee-jerk reactions of like, great, we're going to save all this money. And thankfully, I think the narrative has come back a little bit to where people are saying, well, actually, we probably do need to make that an option for people, but there still needs to be a compelling thing that we offer as a company or an organization that makes our office a valuable place because it's a hub for these things. And it's also a culture driver. I think that's so important too.
Culture's big. And if you feel like it's dangerous to you personally, it's scary, it's a sea of the worst kind of cubicles and open offices that you can imagine. Now you feel empowered. We use that word all the time. You now feel it, even if that's not your company's policy, and you'll figure out how to do it. So the workplace, more than ever, that central hub really needs to be a hub of human activity, a place you want to go. And you'll think about what are the reasons I would go there? Culture's a big one. The ability to either teach if you're a certain age or learn if you're another age, connect and collaborate and be creative. That is super hard to replicate using a Zoom call. And then even people who don't, as you said, don't have a good setup at home. We now see, it's interesting to us, some of the big social issues that we're all wrestling with, this whole inclusiveness and diversity. Could businesses be tied more to the education system and make it could a downtown office building have 2 floors that house the public school? And could the kids' school down the street be a place where a parent could go work? Could there be a co-working spot there? Could we think outside the box and link the two things that suddenly we see how related they are just from a childcare perspective? Because I can't work at home if nobody's watching the kids. And we have this, I think, fiction in the work world about, people sneak out early and got to let the sitter go, or they got to go to the soccer game, or, there's a lot of, we talk about work-life balance. I think we're still working on it.
Sure. Well, Lauren, you mentioned earlier some practical things that your team was doing in terms of keeping a workspace sort of open all day using Miro and things like that. For either of you, are there other hacks that you've discovered or ways that you're taking the edge off of not being able to yet get together in person?
I mean, I can speak to some other ones, Larry. Feel free to jump in too. So one of the other things that's really important for us is facilitating sessions, right, with our clients, and using our work to spark creativity for our clients, right? That's probably a common thing for a lot of folks. So tangibly, we found that, so before, when we do a session, we'd fly, halfway across the country, and we'd be there in person and have a 2-day kind of very deep experience to take people through. Idea of 2 days online is like I don't think people should pay me that much to be tortured. Let me just say that. Okay. So what we've done is we've pulled apart sessions and we've made managing energy one of our most important priorities. And so that might look like an hour and a half, kind of like preface, getting to know everyone, one quick activity, and then another kind of hour and a half container where you're in small breakout groups. Really doing breakout groups has been so important to get the engagement, because when you're in a large group, like, you just lose people. Um, and so we've been really intentional about making sure we're doing shorter sessions, we're breaking things out, we're giving people time in the middle of their day away from the screen so they can come back fresh, because we just have found that otherwise it's so exhausting.
Right. I would agree. Limit the time, break it up into pieces. The breakout session, we've done exactly the same thing. One of the things that I found is kind of a interesting thing when you have a big group, it doesn't happen necessarily when you're in the room. You can be very explicit about asking everybody what their reaction to things that you're presenting. Because a lot of times we'll present, well, this is the cool new office, and isn't this wonderful? And 2 or 3 people out of 8 will commandeer the whole conversation. But if you virtually go around the table and ask all 8 of them, what do you think? What we've found, it's effective, and mix up the order when you have questions like this, and everybody gets a chance to contribute. And the first person isn't the same first person with the first comment out of the box, but we found actually that's pretty interesting, because you get a little bit more interaction, I'll say, with the whole group as opposed to a relatively small number of them.
Yeah.
So I think we are learning as we go about how Zoom and Teams and the virtual platforms can work to our advantage on that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to call out, because so many times when you think of the bias of an in-person interaction, it's whoever has the most power in the room or is the most extrovert,
Right.
kind of gets the main voice. And our Zoom or Microsoft Teams have also been optimized, whether consciously or unconsciously, to have, at first it was 4 people on the screen, then it was 9. But still, if you weren't verbally speaking, in some ways you were minimized to just your initials. And so
Right.
that same kind of bias is coming through. And I love that you've just called on people, which is one way to hear different voices. But we often at Jump think about the benefits of all different kind of learning modalities, and introverts, right? Like, oftentimes we get a lot of introverts who learn to be performing extroverts because that's how we reward people in society. But we find like introverts are able to connect disparate dots much more in more interesting ways than an extrovert who is much more fast and kind of looks at the obvious connections. And so we want to enroll all types of thinkers in. And so I love, Larry, that you've called on people. And we also make sure we're taking more breaks, because I might be done speaking and then there might be a lag or something. So we'll take more breaks so that other voices can come in. And then we also, to your point, call on people by name first, not ask the question and then say their names. Start with, hey, Aaron, what do you think of blah, blah, blah? So you're not like, wait, where did that come from?
Right. I think the other thing I thought that you said that I think is a really important tool is this notion of having some specific time at the beginning to be a little bit more personal. Mm-hmm. And it it's like, how you doing? What's going on in your life? What is the room you're in? What is that I see behind you? And let that moment, and let it go on a little bit. And, every meeting starts that way, even when you're in person. But I think it breaks down the barriers a little bit, because you're going to ask them some pretty direct questions. We have a project we're working on right now out of state. We would do exactly what you just described. We would fly there. We would be there 2 days. It would be super intense. And now we don't have that option. So, in fact, the airline, I'm not even sure they fly there anymore. We're not sure how we would get there. But the notion was, when we had the CEO and his direct reports, and this was, 10, 12 people. So it's kind of unwieldy. But we made him go last whenever we asked a question by design. We told him that. We told the whole group that. we're going to ask everybody. And I literally, in my little pad of paper, I wrote down everybody's name and then mixed them up. I numbered them 1 through 12. And first I would start with 1. And then the next time I started with 2. And I made sure all of them got in. And it brought a level of engagement that I'm not sure we would get that if we were sitting in the room. The CEO would talk, or everyone would be quiet, and the more it's sometimes good to get them out of their comfort zone a little bit. But I do think you got to make it personal. They don't know me. It's a conversation like this. We've all met right here for the first time, and so how we get to know each other and have a comfort level with each other is a pretty important aspect to a successful conversation.
Yeah, well, I found that to be interesting teaching as well, because you have, classes where you're in this sort of high energy environment where you're trying to do really rapid brainstorms, or like kind of almost make it a little bit competitive of like, hey, we're going for volume of ideas, not quality right now. So I'm going to reward the team that has the most post-its at the end of a minute, right? That does, again, tend to favor extroverts, and there's no getting around it. And so what has been interesting is now teaching these kinds of things and facilitating things like this online. You don't necessarily in the moment that we're all doing things collaboratively see a huge difference. The extroverts seem to be more comfortable. But when I come back, so I'll set the students off to do some work. I'll demo a tool for them. We'll practice a little bit. And then I'll say, okay, when we meet again next time, I want to see that you've done at least 5 of these inferencing exercises or filled out however many of these grids. And I'll come back and see that the work's done. And then when they're sort of sharing out to me, like, okay, walk me through what you did, it's really interesting to find out who added certain parts, right? Because they now were able to do that maybe in a safer environment for themselves, or maybe have more time to think about it, or share an idea that maybe they would have been reluctant to say in front of everybody because they don't have the confidence. And some of the interesting things came from students who were not the ones that I would have guessed based on my interactions online with them would have had the most bold ideas, but yet sometimes they were, so I think that it's interesting how we're discovering that the platform and the tool is actually empowering voices that maybe they were always there, they were always valid, but they weren't given the opportunity just because of the platform and the mechanism.
Yeah, that's really
the breakout session idea is a really good one in that sense to me. Break the group down, and that might be in our 2-day session out of state. When we all fly in, we might not have as many of those kind of things. So I love that idea, Lauren. We've tried to be more intentional about that with our employees. Even you gotta check in with them, because you don't know how they're doing. And some people, I worry, people at PDR who, they're a year out of school and they've been working in the office their professional career. They're in the first 6 months of the next 40 years. And all of a sudden they're now working at home and they're by themselves in an apartment, literally by themselves. And how do they feel connected? And who's checking in on them? I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about them.
Lauren, you had an idea about that, introverts or using the platform. You look like you were about to.
I probably did, but I was just vibing off what Larry was just saying there. So.
Okay, sir. Make sure if you had like a knowledge drop moment you wanted to give, deprive you of that. Yeah. Well, I think some of this you've already both kind of alluded to some of these things, but I always like to ask, what are some of your bold predictions for the future based on what we've learned from this? At some point we won't be relegated to our home offices and these small screens, but we will probably be changed by it, and hopefully we'll be changed for the better in some ways, right? What are some of the predictions you have for where we're headed?
I think there will still be offices and people will still go to the office. But I think these other places will clearly to us be an important part of the mix as well. And as I said it earlier too, I think people will feel empowered to find the workplace with the human experience, the human touch, the human centric. I think we are forever changed. We will all believe that this can happen again. Nobody knows even the current path that we're on can speak with any confidence about, will we get a vaccine? What if we never get one? You can find articles about every point of view on the topic that you want. So I think this does this will change things because we will always believe it can happen again. We'll sort of be like, when I grew up and friends had old grandparents, we'll say, who grew up in the Depression and they saved tin cans or pieces of string or, I worry that we'll be those kind of people. And I don't know what the version is. I don't think it's pieces of string, but there's probably some pandemic 2020 version of that story just waiting to be unfolded.
I love that. Yeah, well, of course, the neighborhood leaf blower decided to get working on this bold prediction. I was like, maybe we'll have silent lawn tools in the future. I would love that.
Soundproofing will become a part of your home.
Soundproofing will be, yeah, totally. Yeah, we at Jump, we talk about it's really important. Like, none of us can predict the future. We do need to consider the unlikely possible. And what's more interesting is to figure out what's highly uncertain and then kind of design for those possibilities. So, some of the highly uncertain things that, our teams have been wrestling with is like, whether or not we'll see like a total consolidation in the marketplace, like only the big will thrive. And we're going to see, from a vendor or supplier, just a few companies that kind of rule everything. Or if we're actually going to see much more cracks in the system and lots of new kind of small entities are going to start up and making home-based products and that kind of thing. And so I'm fascinated to see how that goes. I think we'll see probably a little bit of both. But it's looking at those kind of highly uncertain things that are very interesting from us when we think about a futuring perspective. And I also will say the big thing that struck me now that I'm socializing and you think Burning Man is no longer meeting in person, I think our social interactions and what's going to happen virtually, like it's a new era already. In terms of the amount of creativity that people are doing in virtual reality and virtual connecting is just like amazing. And I think we're just going to see that expedite so quickly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Like the idea of even just thinking like, going back a little bit and thinking about the transition from what I would consider talking to someone, growing up when you didn't have text, for instance, and then thinking about like, in a former life, many, many careers ago, I taught high school for 5 years. And I would talk to these high school students about like what was going on in their lives, who their friends were and everything. And they were like, oh, well, I'm talking to so-and-so, or I'd ask them what they did last night. Well, I was talking to my friends until like 2 a.m. I'm like, your parents let you be out till 2 a.m. as a high school student? No, they were referring to texting, right? Like they just considered texting their friends as talking with them. And that relationship was just as real as in person, right? Now, fast forward here, where all of a sudden the idea of like, what does interacting look like? It might actually but meeting with someone or hanging out with someone, it could be this, right? And so Matt just texted me and said, we lost Larry, which it does look like his screen went out. Uh-oh.
Larry has teleported out of this conversation. This is distance by design.
He has actually transitioned. He's possibly transcended to the future. He's going to come back and tell us what he's seeing.
Right? His hologram will be joining shortly.
Yeah. There are some things that this has taught us that might open up ways of thinking. Like UC has always been so focused on the co-op model as it was that it's been really hard for anybody to envision a different world. But I think this has actually forced it, having relatively high disruption of the traditional co-op model has allowed some things to look different. And that might actually, if anything else, that might be another way that a new constraint enables us to try something else. So.
Totally. I mean, I think we're seeing that all the time, right? Is the amount of innovation, 5 to 7 year roadmaps now getting done in 3 weeks because we've just had this opportunity of being really focused on what's important, and the barriers have been removed and people are just go. And so it's really been phenomenal to see what we can achieve when we really set our mind to something.
Yeah. I was going to add that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're back. Welcome back.
Okay. Well, good to be back. I was going to add on that exact topic, Lauren, to us, the rapidity of what happened in the pandemic, and then you lay on top of that the whole racial awareness, Black Lives Matter. I mean that went from 0 to 100 in those of us who didn't pay attention to it. And it's kind of interesting to me, will there be, this kind of acceleration of ideas that we're not going to tolerate? Oh yeah, well, we'll think about that for a while and I'll get back to you. It's like, no, we're going to like do it instantly right now. Uh, and because if you had said in February, well, let me lay out what things will look like in June, you would have, that will never happen. That will never happen. It's not gonna, and now look, here we are and we're dealing with it. Some days better than others.
Yeah, I really appreciate one of the things that, I always used to try and instill, or still do, try and instill in students is the idea of the value of prototyping, and that a prototype should not be well formed yet by the time you test it and use it, because that's how you actually invite feedback, right? So I think that when you had the runway and ability to like default to the way you always did things, you would probably always default to not necessarily sharing an idea that wasn't well formed yet, or like kind of, biasing towards like, well, this always worked, so we'll kind of change a few things but lean into it, and like that's our prototype, right? This has enabled and forced people to embrace like, we're going to have to test something that's sloppy and not perfect yet and just go with it because it's better than nothing, right? So by default, a lot of people are now rapid prototyping and testing prototypes and showing work that's not completely done, and experiencing the benefit of that too, and so I think that's a positive thing that I hope comes out of this, is that the idea of rapid prototyping and learning from failure will actually probably become a more common celebrated thing.
Yeah.
That's great way to look at it. Great way to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, design has always thrived on having a balance of hubris and humility, right? Hubris to believe that you can do something about the situation and make the world better and put forth an idea, and the humility to say, I don't know, and I'm going to put something out here rough and invite feedback and learn. And so it's oscillating between those two postures, and those are the most successful designers and innovators I've seen. And I think we've all gotten a great dose of humility in this, which some of us really needed. And so just add it to the mix and keep on going.
We laugh about the whole work from home thing because it used to be when you talk to a big organization, there might be some little subgroup, and they were always let's let the graphic designers work from home, or this little subgroup of HR. They always had, and everybody never said it, but they're kind of weird to start with. So, and then if you do work with somebody and they go home early because that's when they got to pick up the kids. And, it's always kind of awkward. And, oh, that's right. He leaves at 4. I forgot completely. And there's sort of these unhidden messages that we don't intend to show. Now, suddenly, everybody's doing it. And you can judge for yourself whether it's working or not working. And in the sense that this is rapid prototyping at a huge scale, it's awesome from that respect. Because you see some things, hey, works pretty well, actually. And other things, it could work better if we did these things. And then there's some things that, no, that really doesn't work that way. And I think we're going to see the whole spectrum of it, not either or.
Yeah. Well, I always tell everybody, tell students especially, constraints actually drive innovation and creativity. And now we've all been subjected to some of the ultimate constraints, right? So hopefully like we're squeezing our way out of that, just the same way, the butterfly coming out of the cocoon has to have the struggle to get there. And, I think we're in the midst of the struggle right now, but have really felt like it's been positive to have a lot of these conversations with people who are already looking to the future. The focus is not on what's not working now, the focus is on what this can enable. And so
Right.
appreciate that both of you are looking at it that way as well.
Thank you, Aaron. Really lovely to connect. Love that you're helping the next generation lift off. And Larry, love to meet you as well. And thank you for this idea of activity-based design. I'm going to take that to our team. So really appreciate
Okay.
you.
Sounds good. This has been great. Really great to connect with both of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for your time. Thanks for staying connected with the university and, giving your voice. And we'll have this episode up online for people to continue the interaction, and we'll let you know what the feedback looks like as well. So
sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aaron. And thanks to Matt there. I hope I didn't, create too much of a editing problem. He had a big family reunion planned for tonight, and now he's got to stay up all night splicing the thing together.
Well, that would not be safe because we're not gathering people
Well,
in that group.
6 feet apart. I've got a son coming in from Austin later tonight, and I haven't seen him in months, and so we're gonna try to figure this out.
Yeah, well, that's good. Good deal.
Enjoy.
You bet.
Lauren, Larry, thank you both. Thanks for your
Thanks.
time. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and catching this episode. And we really do invite your feedback. Please feel free to reach out, connect with us on all the social channels and the places where you find us. And feel free to reach out with ideas about how you're being impacted by this experience and what you think the future holds. Thank you to the University of Cincinnati for making this kind of thing possible. Thank you to Cincinnati Bell for your partnership and sponsorship in this as well. Thank you, Lauren and Larry. Hope you both have a great rest of the week, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you.
So much.